Awesome. So we'll go ahead and get started with this session. So, hey everyone, my name is Pava LaPere, and I am the CEO of EcoMap Technologies, and I'm joined here with Kevin Carter, who is our head of business development. See some familiar faces, but for those of you who do not know us, so EcoMap Technologies is a growth company in Baltimore, and we essentially create platforms that help people navigate different ecosystems, whether that is a tech community, a small business community, an industry, a private corporate network. All of those ecosystems are made up of different resources, organizations, people, events, and activity. And essentially what we do is we go into any given ecosystem, collect all of the different data about what exists and what is going on, and we centralize that information into one platform that people can go to and find all of the different resources that they could tap into, or all of the different organizations who are doing work there. So suffice it to say, we are a little bit obsessed with the idea of navigating resources within ecosystems. It's a bit about what we do. But moreover, we're obsessed with the Baltimore ecosystem because today we are a 30-person company about to open up our headquarters in a few months here. We've raised millions of dollars in venture capital and have, enjoyed very dramatic growth. But 3 years ago, we were a fledgling little startup coming out of Johns Hopkins University with a crazy idea, and we were the ones kind of hitting Baltimore's tech ecosystem, trying to find all of these different resources and figure out where to go. And so we have a very soft spot for Baltimore's ecosystem and the navigation within it, because largely that was the origin of our company. And so I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the story of EcoMap and how we got here, because we did grow our company, very largely due to Baltimore's tech ecosystem. And then I'm going to hand it over to Kevin at the end to talk about how you guys can find a lot of those resources that exist within Baltimore's ecosystem. But I'm going to first fast forward. Almost 4 years ago now. I was a student at Johns Hopkins University, and I was very excited about entrepreneurship and really wanted to, help grow the entrepreneurial ecosystem there. And one of the things that I did to that end was founded an incubator that helped students, start their ideas. Did I have any idea what I was doing? No, I was 19. But there wasn't anyone else at the university who was doing it at that time. In fact, I ended up meeting Kevin when Hopkins really acquired that incubator, and we got to launch the Johns Hopkins University Accelerator programs together under Fast Forward. And so at the time, we just had this little incubator and a bunch of student volunteers trying to teach people how to start companies, right? We did not know what we were doing, so we were relying a lot on the opinions of experts, right? Of different mentors and incubators and accelerators within the community that we've come to know. And I knew that Baltimore had a ton of different assets within our ecosystem. I knew we had organizations like ETC and resources like Accelerate Baltimore and organizations like TEDCO and all of these different players in the ecosystem. But whenever I was trying to share that information with students, I couldn't find a good list, right? I literally could not point them to one place that said, here is a list of everything that exists within this community. So I ended up making my own. But quite frankly, I became really obsessed with that question of how hard was it to build a resource database? It seemed really stupid that it was so hard to just aggregate a list of information about what existed in this ecosystem. 4 years, millions of dollars, and 30 people later, it was harder than we thought. But that initial project of going out and, personally identifying the different resources and organizations was really what made me understand the power and the setup of ecosystems and taught me a lot about how they really need to be relied upon for startups to grow and grow quickly. And so we've had this very meta experience in Baltimore because on one hand, we have grown up as a company navigating this ecosystem. Our technology, which was founded for this ecosystem, has grown up, and the ecosystem itself has matured considerably over the past few years. And so back on that day in like 2019, I had a Airtable database that I had paid an intern with a $1,000 grant from Hopkins to compile of the different incubators and accelerators, and we had stuck that online as the first version of our company. And this is where I learned my first hard lesson about what it meant to actually go out and find resources for your business, right? Because for the past few years before that, I had been very heavily involved in Baltimore's ecosystem. And I knew a lot of people. I knew Deb. I knew the people over at TEDCO, and so I was under the impression that, I had a good startup idea, right? It seemed like it would be helpful to be able to have these databases of what's going on in an ecosystem. We did some market research and we found out that other people would buy them too, and they said as much. We figured out what we would need to do to make ours better, and I thought that was enough to go get some pre-seed funding. Maybe if I looked a little bit different the way I do, it would have been, but alas. I went and I started to talk to all of these different mentors and advisors that I had met within my working within Baltimore, and essentially asked them for money. I was like, hey, here's our startup idea. We've already had people who we interviewed say they would buy it. Can we get some funding to build it out? And they were just like, no, child, you can't. And I went through that process for months, and that is one of the first real rough awakenings that I had, was that when you are going and trying to find resources for your business in any ecosystem, including Baltimore's, you have to start with knowing what you actually need and understanding the metrics that you will be expected to hit to be able to tap into certain types of resources, right? At that stage, I had an idea and what we like to call an MVP. But it wasn't a perfect MVP. It was actually quite shitty. And I know that because it was an Airtable embedded in a WordPress site. And so no one was going to buy that from me. So despite the fact that I had this general idea and I had, some idea about who we might sell it to, we really didn't have any traction going for us, right? And yet we were out there trying to pursue pre-seed funding opportunities, when in reality, we should have been looking for an incubator, right? Not an accelerator, which we'll get to in a minute. We should have been looking for an incubator because incubator programs really help you formulate and round out those rough edges within your startup idea. Those are the programs where people will sit you down and say, who are you actually planning on selling this to? Have you really talked to this market? Have you fully understood the value proposition of what you're creating? And are you sure that there is money out there to support it, right? Incubators are meant to help you think through those different areas because those are the foundations that you need to really build a business, right? If there is no need for your product, you can't build your product, or people won't pay you sizable money for that product, it isn't going to work, especially as a high-growth startup, right? Which then kind of gets to the second area that we have found that people often struggle when trying to find resources for their business is not really understanding that difference between what a venture-backed startup needs and what a more traditional business may need, right? And at the time, actually, I'm going to save that for a little bit to talk about that distinction. I have a bit better of an example. So at the time, we needed an incubator, right? And there are a variety of incubator programs within the city of Baltimore. I'm not going to spend too much time telling you how to go find them because we're about to show you a database of all of them at the end of this, right? But the first step, within the entrepreneurial journey, whether you're building a growth startup or a small business, is really trying to understand what your business is and what form it may take. And incubators are perfect for that, right? So after being rejected by pretty much everyone who I thought was definitely going to give me money to do this, and applying to a bunch of accelerators and getting rejected to those, I finally realized that we would just have to prove that what we had built was going to be worthwhile to someone. So again, I was still a I was not in high school. Okay, give me a little bit of credit. Still a college senior, right? And so we participated in the Johns Hopkins I-Corps program. And that program really forces you to do intensive market research, right? It made us go talk to 50 different people about what it was we were building and whether or not they would buy it. And that you can only really do that after you understand what your market is, right? And who you're going to talk to, because you got to pick some segments. And you may have to go through that loop a few times. But we got, pretty lucky, all things considered, because when we did the I-Corps program, we were hearing from not just 2 or 3 people, but a resounding number of people that they did have trouble creating platforms that helped people navigate what existed in their ecosystem. It indeed was a pain in the ass to go out and get all of that data and try to keep it updated and tag it in a way. And they would pay for a solution if it could do XYZ thing, right? It had to be easy to navigate, it had to have all of the data, and that data had to stay updated. So then we really started to solidify what that value proposition was. And it was only through engaging a program within the ecosystem that was focused on doing that intensive market research, right? And that really helped us lay the foundation. From there is a little bit of a dearth within all ecosystems, including Baltimore's, and one that kind of needs to exist. Because at the point when you have validated a business idea to when you can actually get funding to try to scale it up, you're kind of in this horrible period where you're like, I need funding to build the thing, to get the traction that you say I need to build the thing and get funding, right? You're in this constant loop. And I hate to break it largely, but you have to push through that as a founder, right? You have to find some way to build some version of what you are doing. And especially if we speak candidly, if you are any type of diverse founder, right? If you are a Black founder, if you are a woman founder, if you are a founder who's not coming out of an elite institution, this is especially true. You have to find a way to prove traction with your idea before anyone is going to give you funding to even scale that up, right? Because investors, they give you money to scale what you know works, not to figure it out, right? Which is where we'll get to the role of accelerators. And this is where it really varies based off of the type of business that you are building, right? For us, we are a software company. We are a software company that relies on algorithms, which for the first, 3 years of our existence was team members, in the back who are doing it manually. But thankfully, with software startups, there is now this whole new industry called the low and the no-code space, right? And for those of you who are not familiar, low-code tools are tools that essentially let you build fully functioning web and mobile apps without ever writing a line of code. You can drag and drop that, you can make API calls, you can process data, and you never need to write a single line of code. And that is what the first real version of EcoMap was built on, was Webflow. It was a website builder that I hooked up with LaPere, right? And software has largely kind of been freed from that horrible loop, because now, even as a non-technical founder without resources other than time, you can go out and build an MVP of your product and use that to get traction for what you're doing, which is kind of the foundation of what you need to get funding and into accelerators and things of that nature, right? For hardware folks, for medical device folks, you guys are still a little bit out of luck, right? Those are a lot harder to kind of mock up than software is, but the whole premise remains true. Before you can tap into resources that are going to help you scale what you're doing, you need to prove that there is actually a market use. And market research usually is not enough for it. Medical devices is a little bit different, right? Because there's real clinical gaps that you can identify. Hardware as well. But even if you have 100 people saying that they will give you money to do it, to use it, to buy it, whatever, none of that matters until they actually start doing it, right? And so in our first version of the platform that we had built, we had made a fundamental mistake about MVPs. And that was just assuming that it only needed to be minimally functional, right? What we didn't make the leap to is that we were trying to sell a platform that ecosystems would use to display their community and to highlight the reasons why it was great and to highlight their resources. So it couldn't look like shit. And so when we built the next version, we knew that we had to really focus on getting something that looked well designed, which we did using the low-code tools. And we hooked up some basic functionalities using LaPere again, and then we put it online. And at this point, we were at the very beginning stages of the pandemic, right? Around January 2020 is when we put this new version online. And there we got lucky in a lot of ways, but that luck was founded in the fact that we had done a lot of market research. And so we put this product online, the pandemic hit, and suddenly access to digital information became a really high priority. And so suddenly we found, I found myself, it was just 3 people at this time, with the city of Dallas wanting to buy this solution. And they had found the website for Baltimore, and they were like, okay, we want one. Can you connect us to some customers who can, vouch for you? And I just ignored their email because I couldn't. And I just kept ignoring it. And then they emailed me back. They're like, hey, we really just need those referrals. We're ready to move. And I called them up and I was like, hi, you guys would be number 1. And at that point, like 15th lesson that I learned about startups, you got to learn how to price. Because at that point, they were like, how much is it? And I'm like, I don't know, $30,000. And they were like, oh my God, really? Cool, let's go. And so they became our first customer. And that kind of started our path towards, really actually getting some of that natural traction that we needed, right? We did not have any of the fancy AI that we need to do this at scale. It did not exist. We just had an idea of how we would build it and a front-end platform, but that front-end platform was being purchased by people, right? There were people who were using it. And so that started to help us get the traction that we needed. So I was like, okay, awesome, we have that traction, we're gonna go raise some funding. So I went out to all of my mentors who have all been cheering me on from the sidelines and giving me advice and being like, you guys are doing great. And I was like, okay, will you give us money now? And they were like, no, we won't. And I was like, but we have this traction. People are buying it. Look at these customers. And among those early customers was Kaiser Permanente. They were our second. The Aspen Institute. They were our third, right? So I was going to them with what I thought was real customers paying us real money for a product that they didn't know that it was held together with technical duct tape, but it existed, right? And yet we were still not able to get funding. And this is where that mistake that I had mentioned earlier comes in. It is not understanding the difference between traditional businesses and venture scale businesses, right? And I'm going to try my best to talk to each of those things throughout this, but the path to growth after that initial validation point is a lot different. Because at that point, we were still selling lump sum contracts, right? $30,000 one time, and then it was like $1,000 a year, right? For us to update their data. Not correct, but I was guessing. And so we were making a bunch of money in a one-time point of view, but that is not recurring revenue, which is largely what venture scale companies are really looking to get, right? I'm sure you guys have heard it before. Everyone is obsessed with SaaS for reasons beyond, my comprehension, but it makes for a much more scalable and sustainable business model if you're really trying to build a venture scale company, right? But secondarily, the second thing that I had not considered about whether or not we were building a venture scale market, a venture scale product or not, was the market we were targeting. Because originally we had built this solution for entrepreneurial ecosystems only, right? Baltimore's tech ecosystem, Dallas's small business community, the Ghana entrepreneurial community, right? Kaiser Permanente's business resource network, that was kind of like an outlier, right? We had built this solution for entrepreneurial communities. And even though we had incredibly strong traction there, that market is simply not big enough to be a venture scale market, right? And so when we were out trying to go apply to accelerators, apply to funding, they were looking at us, and despite all of that traction, essentially saying that you guys aren't building a venture scale company, right? And so that is where the third area I see a lot of founders mess up in this path to trying to seek out resources. They're going after the wrong resources for either where they are at or the business they are trying to build, right? Because there is no VC in the world, venture capitalist in the world, no matter how much they like you, no matter how much gross revenue you are making, who is going to fund a largely services-based agency-like business. It's simply not what venture capital is meant for. There are plenty of banks who will do that, right? And there are other capital sources you can tap into. But we see a lot of entrepreneurs, both in Baltimore and in other ecosystems, barking up the totally wrong tree when they're trying to go to venture capitalists and get funding for what is largely a traditional business. And there was nothing wrong with that. Let's just put that out there. There is nothing wrong with building a traditional business. But there is a mismatch between the resources that a lot of entrepreneurs think they need to go after and the resources that they can actually tap into, right? And so They wouldn't give me funding. So I was like, okay, screw you guys. We're gonna keep going, right? And we did. We did keep adding new customers, and we kept figuring it out and getting new people coming on board. And after a while, I was in disastrously over my head, right? We had brought on some part-time team members who were helping us manually collect that data and design these platforms, but I was still the primary engineer as we were trying to like unlow code it and build code on top of it and all of that. I was still the primary architect of that, and I was the only one selling, and I was only the one doing like marketing and all of it, and I wasn't doing any of that particularly well, right? And this is where some of the more abstract resources in the ecosystem come into play. Because at a certain point in our growth, I think we were maybe like 6, 7 team members. I don't know, Sharad, you'll probably know a bit better than I do. We had so many people who wanted our product, and I was flailing in the ability to actually meet that demand because we couldn't keep up. And I hadn't really understood that we needed to transition our business model or our marketing and positioning to get those resources. I didn't know that at the time. I just kind of thought that because I was a young female founder, no one was funding me because of that, not because of the business model. So we just kept getting more customers, and I kept drowning more and more and more, right? What I didn't know was happening is that behind the scenes, those mentors and advisors that I had connected with over the past few years, they were watching what was happening, right? And they were essentially, you know, I joked with them one day. I was like, what? Did you guys all get around a table and decide that Pava needed adult supervision? And one of them just goes like, yeah. Because they had, you know, these are other CEOs within Baltimore, other mentors, right? You know, Nick Colbertson has been very crucial to this. Ken, Delali, all of them had realized that we had a good business idea, but I myself could not do it alone, and I was honestly going to flounder it if they didn't get help. So they sat around and thought, how could they help fix that? And they ended up connecting me to what to this day is the most valuable asset that our company has, which is our COO, who's right over there, Sharad Davis. He came from ProTennis, which is another startup in this ecosystem, and he was their chief of staff, and Nick, his boss at the time, very kindly gave him to EcoMap to come in and help us take this idea that obviously had legs and turn it into a company, right? And the power of that network and the power of talent is one of those resource categories that does not get enough attention when we're talking about resources for people to tap into. Because it does not matter if we would have gotten a bunch of venture capital at that moment, right? It does not matter if I would have figured out how to build the AI myself or if we would have gotten all the customers in the world. If it was not for getting a second in command as strong as Sharad is and what he did for this company, EcoMap would not be around today. And that is the fourth mistake I see a lot of founders make, is not understanding when you are in over your head and you need to bring on somebody else. And I will be the first to admit there is such an element of luck to that and rarity, right? I know a lot of founders go out to try to find a co-founder, and it's very hard, right? And I am so grateful every day that we had Sharad, but it wasn't just this happenstance, right? It was the ecosystem that I had been engaging throughout the years who knew me. They knew what I was good at. They knew what I was bad at. They knew what this business needed. And they knew that there was a person who happened to be in this ecosystem who would be a perfect fit. And he was, right? And so really people tend to undercount the importance of these networking events and the importance of keeping on meeting with those mentors and those investors, even when they won't give you the funding that you think they need, right? Because they ended up handing me, you know, they gave EcoMap something that was way more valuable than funding ever could have been at that point, right? And that was the talent to make it happen. So Sharad comes in and he transforms this business from a services-based business into one that had a repeatable SaaS-based model, right? We stopped charging implementations, we started charging higher annual fees, and suddenly our revenue started looking a lot nicer to these investors who were investing in venture scale businesses. And then we go out and we try to raise a pre-seed, and we do it by, you know, we apply to a lot of accelerators. At that point, we got into some of them. We didn't get into others. And the main grievance that we were still getting, despite now having a repeatable business, was that the market wasn't big enough, right? And it was then we realized that the platform we had happened to build for entrepreneurial ecosystems actually works with all types of ecosystems, whether that is a industry, a private network, an individual organization's ecosystem, a high school, anything that you can consider an ecosystem, which I'm not going to get into. It's a very deep definition. It just so happened that the tech worked. And like, I promise you now, that was an accident, right? It was just very much, oh yes, I guess you could use it for that. And once we realized that that was the positioning, that was the market, we could go to those funders we had been talking to with the same exact product and the same exact traction, and we actually started to see more like results, right? We got into Conscious Venture Lab. We got into the Techstars Accelerator that came here, and they helped us really understand what it takes to raise, capital, especially, being a diverse-led company in these types of markets. And so that's the final mistake people make, is sometimes you may not just be, not the final, 6. There's a lot of them. I've made them all, right? You may have the right product and even the right business model, but your market may be wrong for the resources you are trying to go after, right? If you want to be venture scale, there's no way you can cut it. That market needs to be, I'm about to totally butcher this math. One of you guys help me out. What is it usually? $1 billion plus? A bit higher than $1 billion in your total addressable market, right? 2, 3 even nowadays, depending on the type of return. It needs to be very big. That is not to say that you cannot build a very profitable, successful, growing business if that is not your market, but you can't get venture capital, and you're probably not going to be able to get into a lot of the accelerators that are meant to build you to get venture capital, right? And so it may not be your product, it may not be your business model, it may be the market, right? All of those 3 things have to line up. But we get into Techstars, and we continue to grow and add on new team members. At this point, Eden, do you remember, what were we, like 10, 12 people? Yeah, around Techstars, we were like 10, 12. We kept adding customers, all of that. Techstars really helped, kind of kick our ass in a lot of ways about teaching us the final hard truth is that when it comes to venture scale, right, and even more traditional investors, doesn't matter how amazingly charming you are, doesn't matter how good your team is and the customers you have and all of that, the language they speak is revenue, right? And that is the most true if you are a diverse-led company, right? You are fighting up a very big hill when you're trying to raise venture capital, right? 96% of companies can never raise it. That's including companies that shouldn't raise venture capital and try either way, but like a lot of companies cannot. It is a very high bar to cross. But no matter what you look like or what your product is, or even if the investors don't understand it, they understand numbers on a spreadsheet. They understand money in the bank, right? And we were very lucky to have a lot of that. And so after graduating from Techstars and doing the demo day and using that accelerator to accelerate the path we knew we should be on, we were able to raise a seed round. And before I get into that, I want to really double click on accelerators, right? Incubators are where you go to round out the rough edges of this idea you have and iterate on that over time and try to figure out your exact market and your value proposition back and forth doing the market research, right? Bonafide accelerators are meant to help you learn and get ready for doing that at scale, right? And we see a lot of companies, and to be frank, a lot of ecosystem leaders like make a mistake, and I am speaking across the country. We work with ecosystems everywhere, where they have people join accelerators who haven't fleshed out those fundamentals, right? Who haven't gone through that process of refining those edges. So when you try to put them in a machine that teaches them to scale, they flounder because they haven't actually validated what they needed to. And this is something that we see happen across ecosystems. People mislabel if their program is an incubator versus an accelerator. And it really is left to founders to kind of understand that fundamental difference, right? But there is a big discrete difference in the function of those 2 programs, right? Because like Techstars did for us, we were ready to accelerate because we had finished out a lot of those edges. So we were able to use that to refine our pitch, to grow our bottom line, to expand our customer base, to round out our team, to, quite frankly, get their logo on our deck. And then we were able to go into the seed. Question?
Quick question. The shift in the business model that you talked about, was that switching to a subscription-based model?
Yeah. So we essentially went from charging, let's say, $50,000 one time and $2,500 every year to charging $10,000 one time and $5,000 to $10,000 per year. And it all becomes ARR. Yes. And that's one of the big things, whereas if you have a traditional business model, right, you're looking at gross revenue, right? And that is what matters. That is what a lender may look at, for example, if they're evaluating your business. That is not what investors will care about. And we knew that because when we raised the pre-seed, we were like, we have like $1 million in gross. And they were like, what's your ARR? I was like, what?
And in that case, you're looking, the funders who are coming in are looking at actually how many people are signed up and the rate of growth in the subscribers, right?
That's when it depends on the business model. So we are enterprise SaaS. Oh, so we're enterprise SaaS, right? Wrong emphasis there. So we sell to organizations for very big contract values. So they aren't looking at our user growth per se. They're more looking at the names and the contract values and how long we're signing for. So that's where it varies in business model. But for venture scale ARR-based models, yes, it's like how many people are going to continually pay you for this, which is really where we are seeing more and more of a conflation and people misunderstanding what traction means, because we will still see founders, like I mentor, still a good number, and they'll come to me being like, we have a lot of really good users, but we still can't get funding. And then I have to do that uncomfortable thing where it's like, until they give you money, it doesn't matter. And I hate to say it, but for most businesses, that is going to be true, right? People using your platform does not translate into that being a sustainable business model. And that is especially true for what the markets have done recently and what they are looking at right now. There was a time and a skin color and gender where you could go raise on an idea with some initial users, right? But even now, if you don't have solid revenue basis for that, and a lot of it, it's not going to translate. And so before I get on to the seed round dynamics, which is important, I'm about to talk a lot about venture capital. Yeah, I'm about to wrap it up, right? About to talk a lot about venture capital, but I do want to pause here and give another one of the mistakes about seeking resources, is even for venture-backed startups, VC is not the only source of growth capital, right? One, your customers. Our customers, for those first year and a half, whatever it might have been, year before we got any outside capital, we lived and died on our customers giving us money, right? And that posed a really big issue with cash flow, and I couldn't really offset that because I was too young to go get a traditional bank loan, right? I didn't have any assets. But our first money ever in the bank from an outside investor was not from an equity investor. It was from a debt investor. It was from a private individual in New York who was connected to me by a member of Baltimore's ecosystem, another local CEO, Jess Gartner-Haller from Alaview. She connected me to this guy, and he made a private debt investment into us, which we had to pay back. And yes, we had to explain that to people, but to investors, right, who were like, why do you have this debt? But that debt instrument is what bridged us between like running out of money all the time because cash flow was uneven and being able to get our shit together enough to raise the pre-seed round, right? And so even growth startups, founders undercount the role of non-equity based capital, right? But that investment alone, second to Sherrod, is like one of the three things that I'm like, if that did not happen, this company would be dead, right? And I know it. I don't think you know this. I know that to be true because the day before that money hit our bank was the first and only time that EcoMap ever ran out of money. I did not time an invoice correctly, and I checked my bank account after an angry notice from Chase, and it was like negative $10,000. 2 days later, you were supposed to start. And I was freaking out, and then I suddenly, the next day, check after having like a crisis. It was thankfully a Friday. And because that debt investor was not in this time zone, the money had hit the night before, and it's like it never happened. I still keep that mailing from Chase that says you overdrafted your account. I hold on to that, right? Because it just shows the perils of you can be doing everything right as a founder, but these resources are what really allow you to continue on this growth path. And your job is to curate the right resources for where you're at, right? So the long story short, we went out and we were able to raise the seed round. We were incredibly both lucky, but also benefiting off of all the hard work that our team had done. We were growing our customers, we were growing our revenue, and we were able to do that oversubscribed FOMO-based round really quickly, right? Where we got a lot of people really hyped up about what we were doing, and we got to kind of have our pick of that capital. And that finally, it doesn't feel like it, took us out of the most perilous phase of the startup journey. we're still in, the startup. There are still a million and one things that could kill us, but we got out of that phase, which is where most founders struggle the most and where they make the most strategic errors for the type of resources that they go after, right? Because now our resource needs are pretty clear cut. We need great talent, and we have a great head of people to help us do that. We need good sales. We need good business development. We need good product marketing. We have the talent in place. We need funding, right? And now we know that we can go into venture capital. But up until you're at this point, it is a mosaic of what resources you need at what time. Right? There is an art to putting together your own resource ecosystem. And it starts with understanding all of the different options that are available to you around you, right? And that is what I'm going to hand it over to Kevin to kind of walk through. Because this all started with my idea that it should be easier to find this information than it was, right? And I'll spare you guys a lot of the talk about the product, because Kevin will show you, it. But we did not solve this problem of how you put together your mosaic of resources, right? Because that is dependent on every single company and your business model and what you're doing in your industry and all of that. But we've made it a hell of a lot easier, because what we did is we took away that having to find the data part by putting it all in one place. And so with that, Kevin is going to show you the tool that I wish that I had when we were starting it out.
Yeah, thanks. It's a good segue, Pava. But the fact that we had to do that is the reason we have a company. So I'm not too upset about that. And hopefully this will be really informative and beneficial for the folks here who are at various points in their journey as entrepreneurs, maybe as ecosystem support organization leaders here. So I wanted to give a rundown of the Baltimore Tech website that we've built specifically for this tech community, this ecosystem, in addition to the Maryland Entrepreneur Hub, which has like 3,000 resources that are available for entrepreneurs, small business owners, nonprofit leaders throughout the entire state of Maryland. And as Pava mentioned, ecosystems, we kind of work with our customers to define it how they want to define it. And so you'll see there is overlap between, as you might imagine, Baltimore's tech ecosystem is a component of Maryland's entrepreneurial ecosystem. We want to make sure that you, as a takeaway, have some things you can go and look through and understand how to navigate this site to really get what's most relevant to you in the time being. Might regret asking this. How many people have heard of Baltimore.tech before? All right. I think our team members don't count. I would really be upset if our team members didn't raise their hand. But that's good. I only saw a handful of hands that were non-EcoMap people. That means I'm talking to the right crowd, because you are here at a Baltimore Innovation Week event. You are a part of Baltimore's tech ecosystem. So we built this out to really help people navigate and better understand what is out there. So the one thing I'll get to after I run through the homepage is the resources. So that's what you might think of. I'm trying to find funding. I'm trying to find an accelerator. I'm trying to find co-working space. I'm trying to find a maker space, whatever it might be. We've aggregated nearly 400 resources that are available to Baltimore entrepreneurs. We also help people navigate through jobs, events, understand the news that's happening in the ecosystem. And then we worked with, skipping ahead a bit, with our partners, we have a lot of stuff, Fearless and Upsurge, because you need ecosystem partners. We don't, as much as we would love to just create these eco-maps for every single ecosystem that ever existed, as Pava mentioned, that'd be millions, tens of millions, maybe, it's a goal. But the idea is we need people that are dedicated to being these stewards of the ecosystems that can bring EcoMap in and say, hey, we really know the value of just understanding what's out there. We know the value of making an ecosystem accessible and navigable. And we know how much time it takes to actually do this on our own. Because keeping things up to date, first of all, gathering it is one thing, but keeping things up to date is a whole nother beast. And data is only as valuable as it is correct. So what does it look like if you're an entrepreneur, you're looking to navigate this ecosystem? So we've aggregated, I get to three, maybe make it a little bit, no, it's a little confined with the way that the setup's there. But essentially we built 300, we have this database with over 393 resources that you can navigate through. And the way we've built it is so you can really explore it multiple ways. One at the top here, you'll see these different buttons such as funding or events and networks. These are what we call keywords. And keywords are all throughout our website, our platforms. This is what makes it searchable. So you're not necessarily just typing into, like you might say, accelerators in Baltimore and Google that. And what would you see then? You would see one website listing out Accelerate Baltimore from ETC, then the Techstars Equitech Accelerator, then you'd see the Fast Forward U Accelerator at Hopkins, right? Whereas what we are able to do through this technology is take data that's unstructured, that looks different across the board. ETC's website is very different than TEDCO's website, very different than others. But we can take this information and standardize it so you can compare apples to apples as opposed to across fruit. Yeah.
Are you guys putting cookies through the search so the next time somebody comes there, they're not going through that process again?
I don't believe so. Can you answer that,
We
Mar?
don't do it through cookies, but if you make a profile, you can like save different keywords and you can get matched with them for the ways that match you. We haven't, but we get a lot of requests to use cookies to do it, but it's kind of a user privacy thing we're still fighting for. So you can do it, but it's not through the cookie mechanism.
Yeah, so I'm showing you what it looks like to do a non-logged in search, just because I'm not logged in right now and don't have the SSO enabled. But basically, we can help. You can navigate yourself through the things that are most relevant to you by saying, "Hey, I want to find funding." Every entrepreneur, Pava was just saying, you always think you need funding, but you want to be able to make sure you can narrow those down. For example, I want to find funding that maybe is cross-cut with Black individuals in Baltimore. Or maybe I want to find funding that is cross-cut with early stage as opposed to growth stage VC. What are other things I can apply to that are a little bit more for early stage ventures. So that's what you can really do to navigate. And the end goal, or one of the end goals you can do, is really go down and try to find just through the various tags we have, saying like I want to find funding for Black individuals that are in healthcare and life sciences. You might be able to narrow all those down to the TEDCO Builder Fund, which would be a great resource to make that to take your venture to the next level. So I want to show you what it looks like when you actually go to a resource and try to understand a little bit more about what exactly it is. Because at the end of the day, resources are just one arrow in your quiver, right? There's not just understanding that it exists is part of the battle, but then actually being able to utilize it and make sure the determination whether this is a good fit for you is a whole nother thing. So what we're able to do through our technology is take information directly from the source. So the TEDCO Builder Fund is something that we're never going to be able to describe better than TEDCO, right? You guys know exactly what the Builder Fund does. So the information that you find here is the information that we can pull in here. However, one thing that we can do, what we do uniquely, is this proprietary kind of keyword paradigm, as we call it, right? So these are the things, if you go on the Builder Fund website, you're not necessarily going to see these are the exact industries it's for. This is the type of resource it is. This is the stage it's for. But we can do that partly through human in the loop, partly through our AI and our NLP algorithms. We can go and discern, what resource fits what keyword and make it really easy to navigate for that. So in a similar way, where let's say you found this because you were looking for funding opportunities for Black individuals in the healthcare and life sciences space, let's say you wanted to instead search for all the different resources, all the different data assets, as we call them, for Black individuals across Baltimore's tech ecosystem. So there, for example, you can see the different events that were created that have the tag for Black individuals. You can see the different organizations that do work specifically with the Black community here in Baltimore. And then, of course, finally, we have the resources themselves that you can navigate through. So bringing it down from the 393 to the 47, but always helping people to narrow down even further, where you can say, I want to find the accelerator opportunities specifically curated for Black individuals, right? So there's different ways you can navigate through it there. Any questions on that so far? Yeah.
Is your platform aggregating open source information, or are there proprietary partners that are participating in this?
I have an answer to that. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, well, we mostly draw from public sources.
Yeah.
And if we, yeah, we mostly draw from public sources of information. We'll supplement it with some internal stuff, but mostly this is all public because we're trying to get people to the right part of the ecosystem. So our goal is for you to not live on EcoMap. It is to find the Builder Fund, go to that website and apply. So we're mostly aggregating from discrete public sources. But if it's an internal ecosystem, which we do some of, then we have a lot more, private data sets we may be using.
Yeah.
Great. I mean, the AI, and obviously everything is hyperlinked, so you can be drilling down.
Yeah. So we want to help and make it really valuable to understand at a glance what's available on the website. But we're never going to do a better job of describing what's out there than the folks. We're just trying to route them the right way. But on the same vein, we want to help people understand, for example, what deadlines might be coming up that you can apply to or attend. For example, you might need to understand Able Foundation grants application deadline in a week. So these are things that we want to make sure that people can come back to it time and time again. So what you see today, October 6, 2022, is not what you're going to see November 6, 2022, not what you're going to see October 6th, 2023, right? It's that's part of the value, a huge value for our customers, is that they don't have to go in and click individual links and go through and understand, oh, this is out of date. Oh, that's a 404 error. Oh, that description has changed. Instead, we can do that heavy lifting, take the burden off of them, and then if there's a new deadline for something, we can push that. If a link breaks, we can hide that resource and not promote it, right? Just so we're not sending people to wrong sources of information. So yeah. There's another question. Another way you can utilize this site is to check for events. So one thing we had all the different Baltimore Innovation Week events. Let's see. Oh, ours already passed because I guess we're almost out of time. But we have another one coming up, Make Every Message Matter, happening right after this, and then the Tech and Film panel tonight, if y'all are coming to that. But it's a great way just to also understand what's out there. But it's meant to be a two-way street. This isn't us saying this is everything about Baltimore's tech ecosystem. I think we did a pretty good job of capturing it using our tech, but we also know that there's many businesses here that we weren't able to capture potentially out of our scope. But you want to add yourself as a user. You want to add your own business. You want to add your own resources, or add your own events. All of these options will be here, so it'll make you sign up, which I won't do in the interest of time. But if you do make an account to join this community, we already have over 250 people. Every time I check, it's a slightly higher number. Let's see what we're at now. But it's 276 people that are part of the Baltimore tech community. That's the one thing we don't do. We don't scrape people. We scrape everything else. We don't put you on our platform without you knowing. We might put, if you're a resource provider, we will put your resources there because you want that to get discovered too by the right people. But someone just joined. It was 276. It's real time. One of you did it. I know someone did. Nice, there you go. So that's just a way that you can join the community. You can, using that same keywords, understand, who are the ecosystem builders, who are professionals, who are, things that you're tagging yourself as. You'll be able to reach out to people directly and really, again, make those connections that can lead you to where you want to go. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, Pava, an EcoMap alone would not have made EcoMap's life. Well, paradoxically, we wouldn't have a company if there was an EcoMap, but at the same time, the idea is you're getting plugged into this network, into this ecosystem, and then it's very people-driven, right? You're going to make the relationships with people. You're going to be the one that is experiencing the resources and using the information you can glean there to make the best strategic decisions for your company. That's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to increase the odds of success, increase the odds of knowing about the thing that could be transformational for your business, and then helping you take advantage of it from there. So I know we have a few minutes left in time, maybe 2 minutes left if there's any questions, but I want to give people time to explore this. So any questions, comments, concern, life grievances? Yeah. Yeah, so it works a few different ways. In short, yes, but we give our customers the option of whether they want that event. Let's say you add an event, whether it automatically gets published or if they have to approve it as an admin at first. The same works for example, organizations. If you want to add your own organization, some it's not quite open source. I won't use the term that way, but in a way, it's hey, populate your own ecosystem. Other customers that want to have a more contained ecosystem. I think with this platform, it needs approval, admin approval. I'm not sure because I'm an admin on it too, so I'm I don't know, I just approve things. But yeah. Yeah, you can post jobs, I think we have 70 some that are already up there. So yeah, you can post jobs, post gigs even, so it doesn't have to be hey, here's a 40-hour-a-week job. It could be hey, I need a service provider, I need someone that does X. So yeah, just a place you can do all that. And we do make it easy as possible because if you add something, we use some autofill technology with the URL where we can pull the logo, pull your keywords, or not keywords, but you can pull your description, pull your name, so just to save some time because we know how long it takes to do duplicative data entry and we try to eliminate that as much as possible. Great. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming out.
Thanks.